Hey guys, welcome back to Theme Park Theories, and in today's video we will be doing our very first versus video on this channel, which is basically whenever we take two rides specifically from, two different theme parks, and we'll compare them against each other, compare and contrast, and at the end of the video we'll see which one is better. Now please do keep in mind that this is kind of like my personal opinion really, so of course you can have your own opinion, and please tell me down in the comments below what is your opinion. So as you see here in today's video, we'll be comparing Space Mountain from Disney World and Disneyland. But before we get into that, I would like to say if you're new to the channel, basically what we do here is anything related to theme parks, just being theories, news, and even now doing versus videos, and we have so much more to come, such as rankings and even more theories on some certain events like Halloween Horror Nights soon in the future. So if you're into theme parks and anything related to that, Disney, Universal, Six Flags, etc., please consider subscribing, we'd really appreciate it. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into some of the topics on today's video and what Space Mountain I think is better. So in today's video, we're actually going to start with the second Space Mountain that ever opened, which was in Anaheim, California, aka just the Disneyland Space Mountain. So for starters, this Space Mountain has a much larger queue than the one in Disney World does, which is kind of surprising because typically, the one in Florida, all the attractions in Florida tend to have larger queues, such as like Tower of Terror, Haunted Mansion, etc. But Space Mountain in Disneyland actually has a pretty big queue, and one thing that I do like about it a lot, even though it's not really that heavily themed in with space, it's very, just bright. There's a lot of natural sunlight that goes into this queue line, which I don't know. I just feel like it makes it like the environment a whole lot happier, I guess. I don't know. It is the happiest place on earth after all, and just something about having that queue line like outside with like Tomorrowland all around you is really really cool. Now, of course, I mean, it is a pretty generic queue outside, but like I said, it is nice that you kind of do have some shading over you, but yet you can still sort of see the sunlight. Anyways, whenever you actually walk into Space Mountain itself, you are greeted with this really, really pretty cool and interactive queue line. Now, it's kind of different from the Disney World one, which we'll get into in a little bit, but the coolest thing about this queue line is for sure the station or loading area. This is something that Disney World has, they don't have at all in Disney World, but it reminds me a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind that just opened in Epcot, where you kind of have this loading station over, the trains that are kind of exiting and entering the actual station itself. It's really, really cool looking. Just the lighting and everything is phenomenal, and it looks pretty modern for it being, somewhat of an older ride, which compared to the one in Disney World, of course, it was just super old. This is, kind of has the advantage of having better technology at the time it was built. So now we're on to the ride itself, which as you can see here, it just went through this like red lit room that with some audio of someone talking, getting you ready for your mission into space. And then as soon as you exit that little lift hill room, you go into the iconic blue tunnel, which both Space Mountains have. However, I do think the Disney World one is a little bit better just because the one in Disney World, I believe, is longer and it's a bit more hidden, I guess. Like you don't really know when you're going to turn exactly. However, this one you slowly turn out and you go into this super duper cool lift hill that the Disney World one does not have. And I don't know, I prefer this lift hill over the Disney World one just any day, honestly. It's super duper cool. The effects they work so well, and the soundtrack is so cool in this specific tunnel. It really gets you pumped up for it. Speaking of which, as soon as you exit that lift hill, you are now in space. There is something here that I do have to say versus the Disney World one. I feel like this one, not only does the soundtrack, I feel, fit the Disneyland one a little bit better, although some people might disagree with me on that. However, I feel like this Space Mountain just has a lot more going on as far as like the galaxy, effects go. I just feel like there's a bit more stars, more things moving around. There's more to look at generally. I mean, with that being said, it's still a very darkly lit attraction, but there is just a bit more going on. And of course, I think that could also be benefited from the technology that this one, had versus the Disney World one had back then. But I do think that this one just looks better generally. Not to mention that the ride experience itself is just a lot smoother in general. And of course, I think that also could be said because it is a newer track. So of course, it's going to feel a little bit smoother. And the train cars themselves are also a bit more comfortable than the ones in Disney World, which we will get to in just a little bit here. But the ones in Disneyland are a two-seater car. And I kind of just like the way they look more. They look more like an actual rocket ship versus the ones in Disney World look more like bobsleds, because it came from Matterhorn bobsleds, basically. So just the one in Disneyland is just a lot more comfortable, better effects, better lighting, etc., stuff like that. However, the Disney World one does still have pretty good and redeeming qualities, which we will get to right now. Okay, so now going into the one in Disney World. Now this one, even though I did say the Disneyland one has a lot of, things that it does better, this one does still have a lot of cool stuff. And the first thing I want to mention here is that I feel like it is just more immersive, like with the queue line itself, even though I do appreciate, the sort of outside queue area for the Disneyland one. This one, you're kind of immediately in the space station, so it kind of feels like you're actually immediately put into space. Not only that, but in the queue line itself, you have these windows that you kind of go by, and they're like screens or something almost, or some kind of effect where you move by them and it looks like it's the galaxy kind of moving by you, and it's super duper cool. I love that effect so much. It's just such an iconic thing, whenever you're going on Space Mountain, and just something about this queue line. It's very like 80s retro feeling, while the Disneyland one's a bit more modern, almost like Marvel kind of style. This one I just think has such an iconic feel to it that really can't be beat. With that being said, though, I do have to give the point to the Disneyland queue line for overall just being a really cool looking queue line. I mean, it's just phenomenal, honestly, like just the way it's entirely set up. However, the Disney World one is still a pretty iconic queue with its own little special features that can be found in the Disneyland one, and of course vice versa. But they each have their own pros to it. Disneyland, of course, being the more modern one, and Disney World being the more iconic and just retro 80s style, which I kind of feel like that's what this Space Mountain is definitely trying to be more of, which I kind of like that. So now getting into the actual ride itself. Now, once you're boarded into your little spaceship, it's already a little uncomfortable, I'm not gonna lie. I'm a pretty, decently tall person, so getting into the spaceship isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world. It's very tiny and small, and it's the exact same kind of car as the Matterhorn bobsleds over in Disneyland, so of course, it's not gonna be the easiest thing. But here, of course, we have the blue tunnel that I was talking about earlier, and how I do think the Disney World one's a bit better just because it kind of goes faster, and I just think the sense of like you're not gonna know where it's gonna turn kind of works better in Disney World overall. And also it kind of has more of like a purple lighting, which I kind of dig more than the light blue over in Disneyland. So for that tunnel specifically, I'm gonna give the point to Disney World. However, the lift hill here definitely goes to Disneyland in my opinion. The only, I feel like, redeeming qualities of the one in Disney World are those two astronauts that are like hanging upside down, like floating upside down. That's really cool, I like that. And that sometimes you can actually see a train fly by you as you're going up the lift hill, and it scares me every single time it happens. It's just so loud and unexpected. It's honestly really funny. But after the lift hill, there's really not much different from the one in Disneyland, besides the fact that this one is a lot more rough. However, I do kind of like the roughness. I don't know why, just something about a really rough coaster in the dark. It kind of creates a more scary feeling than one in Disneyland does. I don't know, that could just be me though. But as you can see here, it's kind of clear that Disney World doesn't have near as many special effects as the one in Disneyland does. You can barely see any stars in this video, while in the one in Disneyland, you could see stars everywhere you looked. It definitely had a more immersive feel as far as the ride goes. So for the ride portion itself, I'm of course going to give this point to Disneyland. Something else I would like to mention is that I do feel like the soundtrack in Disney World, even though I do believe it is the same soundtrack, it just fits better in Disneyland in my opinion. I know, again, a lot of people say like that's kind of controversial, but I just think, especially in like the lift hill section, it just kind of really gets you pumped up for it. And just overall, I do think it just fits better. So even though it's like pretty much the same soundtrack, I do have to give the point again for this one to Disneyland as well. So now that the ride is over with, you've gone through space, now you're kind of unloading out of your spaceship, you can definitely see how retro this Space Mountain is just by the carpeting. It almost looks like an old school like 80s arcade, which is really cool. And I actually really like that, even though, it isn't very modern. I just think it has such a nice and charming retro feel to it. I know I've said that a lot in this video, but that is something I really do like about this Space Mountain. It just feels like almost like a giant laser tag arena from an old arcade or something, and I just love that feeling. And then, of course, like any good Disney attraction, you walk out into a gift shop. Now, I do have to say the one in Disney World, I believe, is a bit more prominent. I'm not even sure if the one in Disneyland has a full-fledged out gift shop for Space Mountain specifically, although it might, but I'm not really going to give a point for the gift shop. I mean, it's not really a part of the ride. However, I do want to say that you can actually get a lot of pretty cool stuff from the Space Mountain gift shop that's very exclusive to Space Mountain, such as I believe, new wave of merchandise that just came out of like a Funko Pop of the like Mickey riding the rocket or something, a cookie jar of the mountain itself, and a model, I believe, which is really, really cool. So if you're a fan of Space Mountain, I'd highly recommend going picking that up, along with like them releasing some stuff in Target, like a Space Mountain board game and a Big Thunder Mountain one as well. Really, really cool stuff. So yeah, if you're a fan of the Disney parks, hey, all that stuff is, in stores like near you. We're not sponsored, but basically, I think out of all of these points that I mentioned out today, the Disneyland one I do think is the better Space Mountain overall. Of course, though, like I said, it does have the advantage of being the newer one out of the two by decades. So it kind of just does get that technology benefit. So yeah, Disneyland is basically the clear winner. However, the Disney World one is still very charming in its own right. I'm a big fan of like just that, I don't know, like that kind of cheesy laser tag 80s arcade feel, and I think the Disney World one really has that for some reason. I know it's not really supposed to have that element, but it just does, and I really hope that they don't really change it because I feel like it just kind of makes that one iconic in its own way. Anyways, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Please tell me down in the comments below which Space Mountain is your favorite. Even tell me which one is your favorite from the Across the World. I know there's some other ones that are really, really cool over in, other parks around the world. And I know that the one I believe in Tokyo maybe is getting a complete redesign of the mountain itself, which looks phenomenal. It'll fit a lot better with Tron too. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.